Sustrans. Today we're going to give you a short video about how to use your gears on your bike. If you're not familiar with your bike gears, it's worth finding a flat space and having a go at moving up and down the gears so you get used to how they feel. You'll find that there are different gear systems on different bikes. The two most common ones are ones like this, where you have a twist function on the handle which will show you the numbers, or you might have levers that will change your gear. They both do the same thing, it's just different ways of doing it. When you're on your bike, your left hand controls the gears at the front of your bike. So the 2 or 3 wheels that you will have at the front of the bike are controlled by your left hand. So if you have 2 wheels like this bike has, or you might have 3 wheels at the front like this bike has, and that just gives you more gears. That's all that's about. Your right hand will control the gears at the back, and that's where you'll have a lot more wheels at the back. And again, the number of cogs that you've got at the back will depend on the different type of bike that you've got. So if we start off in the smallest wheel at the front and the largest wheel, so if you can just click your levers up to the largest one, that's perfect. So when the bike is in the smallest wheel at the front and the largest wheel at the back, that is the easiest gear that your bike can be in. And what you might find is that if you stay in this gear, at times you're pedalling really frantically and the bike isn't going anywhere. And that would indicate that you might need to move up the gears. So to move up the gears, you might leave the one at the front in the same position, but start to move the gears at the back, and that will make it feel a little bit harder. And you can move all the way down the gears until you get to the smallest wheel on the back. There we go, all the way down, one more, and we're down. And then if you move the left hand levers into the largest wheel at the front, so that's now the bike in its hardest gear. So you would find that if you were on a flat section of road, that the pedalling here might be quite difficult and quite hard, and you might find that you're it's really grinding to push the pedals around. So you might use this if you were maybe coming, say maybe on a downhill. So you can use the gears in between, so we could drop the front one into our smaller ring, the front one. That's it. Now, if you can just move your right hand one to the smallest cog again, so just click the lever down. Okay, great. So here you can see that the front set of gears is in the smallest and the back set of gears is in the smallest. Don't really want to ride in this position because this is the chain at full stretch crossing the gearing system. So if you find yourself in this position, ideally you would need to take your left hand, so the front gears up 1, and your back gears on your right hand maybe down, so to make it easier, say maybe 3 or 4. So 2 levers together, that's it, click, and find somewhere that's a bit more comfortable to ride in. So basically the main thing to remember on the gears is if you're pedalling frantically and going nowhere, then you probably need to come up your gears. If your pedalling is really hard and you're finding a lot of resistance, you probably need to come down your gears. And it's worth just spending a bit of time just moving up and down those gears and just feeling what it feels like when you're pedalling, and that will help you to then understand which gears you might need as the road changes. So for example, as you're coming and you can see a hill in front of you, you might need to start to think about coming down the gears. If you're at the top of the hill and you can see that you've got a downhill bit, you might want to think about making the gears a little bit harder, so coming back up the gears. Okay, so have a practice, see how you feel. And just remember that you need to be pedalling in order to change gear. If you stop pedalling, then the bike will struggle to kind of change gear. All right, any questions? Feel free to email me at emma.hagger@sustrans.org.uk. Thanks very much. Bye. Hi, I'm Emma from Sustrans. This little short video is going to talk to you about how to take the wheels off your bike. If you've never taken the wheels off your bike, it's a really good thing to do. Just find yourself a bit of space, you know, quite a half hour, and just have a go at taking them off and putting them back on again. There are generally two ways that the wheels are affixed to the bike. In this bike here, we have a nut system. So you have two nuts, one either side of the wheel, which you would need a spanner to fix on and undo those bolts like so. On this type of bike, we have what's known as a quick release lever, and that would enable you to take the wheels off. The first thing to do though, before you start to take your wheels off, is that you need to open up your brakes. If you don't open up the brakes, then the brake pads will sit on the wheels, and that will stop you being able to take the wheel out. On this type of braking system, which is really familiar on a hybrid bike or a mountain bike, in order to open up the brake, you would just need to pull this back, and enable the wire to come into the casing and just open it up like so. On this type of bike, we have a quick release lever, which is situated here, and you would just open that to release the brakes on the wheel. Taking the front wheel off a bike, doesn't matter whether it's this type of system or this type of system, is really straightforward. You would just, on the quick release, you're going to open your lever, you're just going to loosen it off, making sure that the brake is open, and then once it's loose, you're just going to lift the wheel off. And that's exactly the same whether it's a quick release or whether you have a nut system. Doing it back up again, you want to make sure that this lever here, this is too loose, so we'd need to just tighten that up a little bit more. Make sure the wheel stays fairly centre, and I want to be able to push that down to close it, but not so hard that I can't then kind of open it fairly easily with a couple of fingers. It shouldn't be so loose that it flops open, and it shouldn't be so tight that I'm kind of almost standing on the bike to open it. Taking off the back wheel is where it gets a little bit more tricky, and is probably the one thing that people don't really like to do. So definitely have a go at taking the back wheel off. The first thing to do when it comes to taking the back wheel off is make sure that your gearing here, that your chain is down on the smallest cog on your back gears, and that just gives you a little bit more space to manoeuvre. So first thing I do is make sure that my quick release on my brakes here are open, so I've got a little bit of room to manoeuvre. I'm going to open my lever, I'm going to loosen this off. Just going to pull back the derailleur. You can just do that by holding on to it, and then I'm going to pull my wheel out. Now this bit's always a little bit tricky because you're trying to manoeuvre the wheel outside of the gearing system, so just have a practice until it feels like it comes loose, and then lift it off the chain. I want to try and leave the chain in that position so that I know when I put my wheel back on where I need to go, and that's my wheel off. To put the wheel back on, push it into position, I'm going to lift the chain up, and I'm just going to place it there to make sure that I keep the wheel and the chain in the right position. I'm going to give myself a little bit more space here. I'm going to push my wheel back into position. This one's always a little bit of a tricky one to get it to go back down in. There we go. Making sure that the wheel is sitting back into the hanger properly, and then make sure it's reasonably straight and sitting between the brake blocks, not catching on either one of those. Tightening it up exactly the same way as we did at the front. I'm going to tighten that up until I feel some resistance on the lever. Oh, slightly a bit over to one side there, so we'll just, yeah, you can hear that against the brake block. And there we go. Oh, just make sure I've got that in straight. There we go. Keep tightening that up. Might have to fiddle around just a little bit to make sure that I'm not catching the brake pads. There we go. And we're all back in again. So that's it. That's how you take the front wheel and the back wheel off your bike. And like I say, if you've not had a go at doing it, it's worth having a practice so that if you do get a puncture, when you're out on your bike, you're not worried about taking either the back or the front wheel off. If you've got any questions, feel free to contact me, emma.hagger@sustrans.org.uk. Hi, Emma from Sustrans. This video is just going to take you through how to deal with a puncture. Puncture is one of the most common mechanical failures on the bike, so it's worth knowing how to do this. If you've never dealt with a puncture, the first thing to do is take your wheel off, take the tyre off, take the inner tube out, and then put it all back together again. And then when you're out on the road, you'll know that if you get a puncture, you'll know how to deal with it. So as you can see, I've taken the wheel off the bike and I have a puncture. So the first thing that we have to do is actually take the tyre off of the wheel, and we do that using what are known as tyre levers. You'll get all sorts of different types of tyre levers. They all work in the same way. You've got a little hook at one end and a larger hook at the other end. And the way that they work is you find a spoke, doesn't matter, anyone will do. You take the little hook like this and it goes in underneath the rim of the tyre. This is known as the bead, the tyre bead here. And then you hook the other end onto a spoke. And that just helps now just to loosen the tyre off of the rim of the wheel. You normally get 3 tyre levers, so you can take another tyre lever, go along another spoke and do exactly the same thing, just lift it off, move around a bit further. Now what we may find when we put this tyre lever in is that 1 or 2 of the other tyre levers will become loose and drop off. So that's absolutely fine. At this point, we've got a reasonable amount of slack in the tyre. Some people have different ways of doing this. There's no kind of right or wrong way, it's whatever works for you. Some people might just put the tyre lever in now and take it all the way around. I wouldn't advise doing that because you don't want to catch or damage the rim of the tyre. So all I would do is just taking one tyre lever, I work my way round until I work one side of the tyre off of the rim of the wheel. And that's just keep going all the way round until the tyre is completely off on one side, like so. So here we have the tyre off on one side but still remains on the wheel on the other side. I'm then going to move to my valve. This is this piece here. I'm going to remove the dust cap and take that off. Some valves have a small collar here. If you have one of those, you would just remove that as well. I'm then going to just pull the tyre back, and you can start anywhere you like, it doesn't really matter. This time I'm going to start near my valve, and I'm just going to try and just remove the inner tube from up inside my tyre, and I'm going to do that the whole way round until I come back to my valve. I'm then going to push the tyre back, so I expose, and I'm going to pull the tube away from the wheel. So here I now have my tube that has a puncture. So you have 2 choices here. You can either throw these away or you can repair them. So if you're going to repair them, you would need something like this, a puncture repair kit with some glue and some patches. Very handily, puncture repair kits come with instructions, so you don't need to remember how to use them, you can just follow the instructions. If you can't find where the hole is, you can put your tube in some water, and as you push some of the air you'll see some bubbles escape, which will tell you where the hole is. Most people don't repair tubes at the side of the road. It is something they would do when they get home, so you would just put this one up, put it in your pocket or your bag and take it home with you, and either repair or dispose of it when you get home. So it's always a good idea to carry some spare tubes, and that way if you do get a puncture, it's very easy and straightforward to repair. So before we go about kind of replacing or repairing our tube, we need to try and establish what caused the puncture. So, and again, people have different ways of doing this. I like to just remove the tyre completely from the wheel of the bike. And the first thing I'm going to do is just check that the rim tape, which is this white piece of plastic here, which covers where the spokes would come through into the wheel. Just make sure that that's all okay, there's no damage, no bits missing, that all looks fine. Then I'm going to turn my attention to my tyre itself. Generally, punctures are caused because you might have a piece of glass or a thorn stuck into the tyre that's caused the puncture. So just visually, I'm going to just open up my tyre, and I'm going to take a look all the way round on the outside, just to see if I can see anything sticking in the tyre. If I can't see anything on the inside, I'm going to do the same on the outside. I'm going to do the same on the inside and just take a look and see if I can see anything. If I've done a visual check and I'm happy that I can't see anything, then I might just run my finger just very gently around the inside to see if I can feel anything. Don't want to do that first of all, because if there is a bit of glass or a thorn, I don't want to catch or hurt my finger on that. So just going to do a check to make sure that everything is okay. Obviously, if there is a piece of glass or something similar stuck in the tyre, you would need to remove that. Once I'm happy that my tyre is okay, I'm good to kind of put it all back together again. So the first thing we're going to do is just put one side of the tyre back onto the wheel. That should be fairly straightforward, shouldn't be too difficult to just pop that back on. Shouldn't be too difficult or tight to just drop one side of the tyre back on. So here we go, one on, one off. I'm then going to need to try and find my valve hole, and a little handy little tip is that most wheels have some kind of sticker or transfer on them. If you look at the opposite side, that's where you'll find your valve hole. So that's what I need to find to put my tube in. So I've got my new tube. Now you'll notice that this tube has got a little bit of air in it. So before you put your new tube into your tyre, it's worth putting just a small amount of air in, so that the tube holds its shape. That makes it much easier when you're putting your tube back in. So I'm going to just lift my tyre back, find my valve hole, and just drop that back in. And then lift the tyre just over the tube. And again, just working my way round, I'm just going to fit the tube back up inside the tyre. So just work all the way around, just lift it up and put it in. Now, if you didn't have any air in this tube, it would actually be quite difficult to do this. The tube would be quite all over the place, so just want to make sure that you push it up. Try not to twist it, you want to keep it all in the same way. Just pop it all in, make sure that's all in. There we go. And then, again, you can start in different places. We're going to start to push the tyre back into the rim of the wheel. And to do that, we just use our thumbs to push up and back and try and push the tyre, making sure that tube stays stuck up inside the wheel of the tyre. So I'm going to do a bit on one side, and then I'm going to do a little bit on the other side. I'm just going to work my way round. So you can think of it like a clock face, doing a quarter at a time. And eventually we're going to get to the point where the tyre gets very tight, like so. And that bit is where, if you're strong enough, you can continue to use your thumbs to push the tyre backwards and upwards to sit behind the rim. I'm not strong enough to do that, so I do need to use a tyre lever. And if you do need to use a tyre lever, you just need to be careful that you don't catch the tube when you're doing it. So I'm literally just going to use the tyre lever with my thumb, just to help on that last little bit where it gets really tight, just to push the tyre back up onto the rim of the wheel, and hopefully it will just pop up at some point and just sit back into that wheel for me. This is always the tough bit, and it's always the bit that most people have difficulty with, because it can get, depending on the type of tyre that you've got, it can actually get, there we go, quite tight to do. So there we are, back together. So quick check round, just to make sure nothing is pinched or not sitting right. Sometimes you might find that you've got a slight rise here where the valve is, so you would just need to pull that down and make sure that it's flat. There are two types of valve that you will find on tyres. One like this, which is known as a Prester valve, and in order to put air in, you need to open this little bit, this little valve at the end to put the air in. The other type is known as a Schrader, which is on this mountain bike, and that's the similar one that you would get, or the same one that you would get on a car tyre. and there's no issues there. You can just affix your pump straight on. In terms of pumps, most people have something like this, a little mini pump. Generally, most of these mini pumps you will be able to use either a Presta or a shader. It won't matter, you just need to unscrew the end and you can set it up for either. This is currently set up for a Presta. The other type of pump is what's known as a track pump and looks like this and has a pressure gauge on it. This one's quite nifty. I don't need to make any changes to it. It will fit either type of valve as it is, which is rather handy. So all you would then do, once you're back in, I'm going to open that valve out, I'm going to fix my pump, and I'm going to put some air into my tyre. So that's it. When I'm happy enough, tighten that back up. If you do have a collar, you would just screw that back on, only needs to be hand tight, and then your dust cap would just fit onto the end. If you don't have a pump like this one with a pressure gauge, that's okay. You will find on the side of the rim of the tyre, so it's here on this tyre, will tell you how much to inflate your tyre by. If you've only got one of these kind of types of pumps, it will do the job. And the way that you would check is you would just use, I use apples and oranges. If it feels like an apple, so it's hard and firm, it's good to ride. If it feels like an orange, so you can see this one would need a little bit more air, you would just put a little bit more air in it. But as long as it feels nice and firm, you are good to go. So that's it, that's your puncture repair. If you've got any questions, please feel free to email me, emma.hagger@sustrans.org.uk.